Whether you're doing dry January, sober October, or just want a refreshing alcohol-free drink, it's hard to deny the greatness of hop water. It's like beer-flavored LaCroix. What's not to like? But how come the stuff from the store tastes so much better than the sparkling hop water I make at home? What's the trick? Well, I plan to crack the code by testing several recipes and putting them head to head to find once and for all the ultimate hop water recipe to rule them all. Hop water doesn't sound complicated. It's just water and hops mixed together with some bubbles, right? Well, I bet if you go to your home brewery right now and toss a hop pellet into a cup of water, I guarantee you'll have a hard time putting that back. There's more to it than that. For one, it's not about how bitter it is. Hop water is first and foremost a refreshing sparkling water that has the essence of hops. If the hop water is super bitter, it won't be enjoyable. Hop bitterness works in beer because the sweet wort balances it out. But in water, there's nothing. So hurdle 1 is trying to not extract too much astringent bitterness. And the hop character that comes through should be more fruity and juicy. Or at least in my mind, I want a citrusy and tropical tasting hop water, as opposed to a floral and woody one. But if that's your jam, then go for it. So when choosing hops, you should be picking one that has flavors you like. Don't expect Fuggle hop water that tastes like pineapples. Citra, Amarillo, Cascade, Centennial, Mosaic, and really any hop that you like in a hazy IPA are a great choice. Then let's talk about the water. I think this goes without saying, but the best tasting water will make the best tasting sparkling water. But is there anything that can be done to heighten the experience? Well, we can look to beer salts to see how they might be able to amplify the hop character. Using something like gypsum or calcium sulfate, it should really make the hops pop. At least when we brew beer and add this, it tends to promote the hop crispness and prominence. And adding some acid, either in the form of lactic acid or even some citrus, should make the water even more refreshing and quenchable. At least in theory.
A food theory!
Sorry, wrong show. Anyway, if you're not familiar with either of these, you can easily get them at any homebrew store for a few bucks. Or I'll also have a link in the description for you to pick some up online if you want to test them out yourself. Many of the popular hop water recipes online look pretty similar, and they infuse hops into warm water around 170 degrees, then chill, add gypsum, sometimes even calcium chloride, and add some form of acid. Then carbonate in a keg and serve. And this is how I did it for a long while, since it seemed like this was the only way it could be done. But then I tried a pro-brewed hop water, and my idea of what a good hop water should be started to change. If we stop and take a quick look at the pro versions, we can gain some insight into how they do it. Two of the most popular ones that I can find near me are Sierra Nevada's Hop Splash and Lagunitas Hoppy Refresher. Sierra Nevada's version is made with Citra and Amarillo, which they say gives a medley of peach, mango, and grapefruit. And on their site, they have a little segment about the recipe. They start with carbon-filtered, pH-adjusted water, and they say they dry hop the water for a brief amount of time. Interesting. I haven't really seen any recipes online that say that. And Lagunitas' version is made with Citra, as well as Equinox and Centennial hops, and they also dry hop the water. In fact, they add a pinch of brewer's yeast to biotransformate the hops. Wow, that certainly sounds cool. Not that I'm sure how that technically works, but it sounds like something to test. So neither of these bigwigs are steeping the hops in a whirlpool. Maybe that's why their products are smoother and more fruity. Well, I had to find out if this was in fact the best way to make hop water. And not only that, I would also test whether or not you need to add those salts and acids to finally get to the bottom of this. So to start, I made separate 1-gallon batches. The first one would be the dry hop method, and the second one would be the hot steep method. I did both without adding any salts or any acids. For the dry hop method, I collected 1 gallon of filtered water and then added 4 grams of Cascade into a hop sock and added it into the water. I also played with adding some yeast, but I'll save you some time here. Here I'm testing W3470 Lager, and later I tested a Verdant IPA strain as well as not using any yeast at all. And to be honest, I could never tell a difference. I'm not sure why this would work to release more terpenes out of the hops in the short amount of time that I plan to dry hop and with no fermentation. So for now, let's just cross off adding yeast and don't worry about it. If you know more about why Lagunitas uses yeast in their hop water, let me know in the comments. Anywho, I dry hopped the 4 gram of Cascade for 6 hours, at which I pulled out the bag and then added the hop water into a mini keg to carbonate. For the hot steep version, I heated up some water to a boil and then cooled to 170 degrees Fahrenheit, at which point I added 2 grams of the Cascade and let it steep for 2 minutes. I'm loosely going off the Clawhammer recipe if you're wondering. And also, I'm using Cascade for both methods and keeping the hops in a hop sock for both recipes to kind of level the playing field. After the 20 minutes, I chilled down the water and then added it into a container with more cold water, up to the 1 gallon mark and then carb that up. And on that note about carbonating, I'm using a keg and force carbonating with CO2, which is the quickest way to do it. But you could certainly try carbonating by bottle conditioning, just adding a little bit of yeast and sugar, but doing it in a keg turns it around much faster. And if you want to know more about how to keg, I got a video all about it. Next, I split up the sparkling waters into 4 bottles each. 1 bottle would be kept plain as I made it, 1 bottle would have a pinch of gypsum, 1 bottle would have a dash of lactic acid, and the last would have a bit of both gypsum and lactic acid. If you don't have lactic acid, you can totally just try using some citrus like lime. And once I had all 8 bottles filled, it was time for some serious taste testing. With a notepad in hand, I took some time to compare them, comparing all the dry hop ones against each other, then the hot steeped ones, then comparing all of them against each other. Now, this wasn't a blind triangle test, but to me, it was pretty clear there was a difference. Right away, I noticed just how much softer the hop bitterness was in the dry hop version. The hot steeped had a sharpness that made it stand out, almost an astringency, and I was curious to see how they compared visually. So I placed the unadjusted versions in a glass, dry hop on the left, hot steep on the right. And at first it doesn't appear like there really is much of a difference. Maybe you could say the hot steep has a slightly more yellow tint. But then when I flip them around to be backlit, you can really notice what's going on. The hot steep version had a bunch more hop matter floating around, probably what led it to have a bit more of that harshness. Then comparing each of the gypsum, acid, and both edition versions, the changes were not as drastic. I did notice that the gypsum versions added a bit of minerality and a bump up on the crispness of the water, just a tiny bit. The acid though really didn't impart much at first, but with continued tasting and comparing, I felt that it did give just a touch of zip to the finish that made it a little more thirst quenching. So with the water test complete, I gathered my notes and prepared to design what I believed is the ultimate hop water recipe, and here's what I determined. Start with 1 gallon of filtered water. And I'm gonna bypass the gypsum. I feel like it added too much minerality, which kind of distracted from the hop flavor. And instead of using lactic acid, I actually like the way that lime added a bit of that citrusy punch that complements the fruit flavor in the hops, and adds that acidic bite that really makes this more refreshing. And for hops, I'm really going for that tropical flavor, so I'll be using a bit of Simcoe and Amarillo, 2 grams each, for 4 grams total. Infuse for 6 hours. Transfer to a keg and carbonate. I like it quite fizzy, so around 20 psi. And once it's bubbly, usually after a few days, it should look something like this. Whether I'm trying to limit my drinking or just want something crisp to sip on during the day, I'm reaching for this every time. And there's so many ways to customize this to your preference. Not only in the hops you choose, but you can even start to get creative with the flavor combinations. Maybe try something like lime and Motueka for a Sprite-like flavor, or even blackberry extract and mosaic for a super berry flavored one. Get wild with it. But let me know if you try this out and what you think. And if you're looking for another sparkling non-alcoholic, then you gotta try this fermented lemonade made with gingerbug. The best way to stay hydrated.